Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Perfect Building Maintenance, M&T Bank, Customers Bank, Marks Paneth LLP, Ariel Property Advisors, Sterling National Bank, Capital One Bank, Collins Building Services, Meridian Capital Group. Additional support has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, Amerant Bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, B6 Real Estate Advisors, Briarwood Organization, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Commercial Mortgage, Citizens Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Properties LLC, Handler Real Estate, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Matone Group, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merengoff Family Foundation, and these friends. You have 8.5 to 9 million people living in New York City. Where do people find an affordable apartment? How do they find an affordable apartment? Who's eligible for an affordable apartment? Can they own it? Can they rent it? What's happening? So I've assembled this group of individuals today to talk about affordable housing in New York City. Each one will introduce themselves and tell them a little bit about it. Brian.
Brian Kelly with the Gotham Organization, our EVP of Development. The firm is more than 100 years old and have fashioned ourselves after being a public-private partner in development, working in coordination with city agencies and having a history of collaborating with not-for-profit organizations. We focus on a double bottom line, which is social impact and, of course, economic, so that it's a win-win for communities. And right now, throughout the four boroughs, excluding Staten Island, we have at least 3,000 mixed-income apartments in our pipeline, which are in design or in near future are groundbreaking.
Jessica Sherman. I work at Douglaston Development. I'm an Associate Vice President of Affordable Housing. Very similar to Brian at Gotham, we work closely with nonprofits, government agencies, and on our own to design, construct, develop, and manage affordable and market rate projects. In our affordable pipeline, we have about 900 units ready to go over the next 5 years.
Dan Duca, I work at the Briarwood Organization, and like the two of them, you handle acquisition, RFP, overseeing development, construction, and then finally the management of affordable properties. We work everywhere except for Staten Island, and we have about, I would say, 400 in development and probably another 500 being built as third-party contractors.
John?
John Valadares, Slate Property Group, historically market rate developers, but a huge focus of our business going forward is in the affordable sector, affordable, homeless, and supportive housing. We have probably a few thousand units in our pipeline, including entitlement work and JV work, mostly in the Bronx, Queens, Far Rockaway, nothing in Staten Island, and nothing in Manhattan.
So here's the question. How does a developer make a decision of where they're going to try to build an affordable housing? Because land is expensive, development costs are expensive, but how do you make a determination?
I think there's three real ways that we can identify affordable housing sites. The first is pure acquisition. So not as much today, but historically there's been a lot of land, before the last 3 years, maybe in the Bronx, where it made sense to acquire a site and build it affordable. We did that up at 192nd and Grand Concourse. We have a 92-unit mixed middle income project that is fully leased now.
For my audience, explain what a mixed middle use income project is.
Great. So the city has term sheets that are in line with what their goals are for the development of affordable housing. Historically, one was the mixed middle income term sheet, which was aimed at more moderate income housing for working families. There's the SARA term sheet, which is based on senior housing. There's Mix and Match, which has different levels of affordability. So both at the city and state level, you can sort of understand what the affordable housing goals are.
And within those, you can sometimes, they're flexible. So you have options to choose depending on what AMI levels you want. Depending on the size of the project, you have a range of AMI levels.
And just outside of acquisition, there's RFPs from the city, which I know we go after often and are really great, exciting projects that also align with city priorities, and then partnering with nonprofits, cultural institutions. Right now, the latter two make a lot more sense than straight acquisitions.
And I think the last one is, another one is just entitlement. I think that it's partly through acquisition, but it's through rezonings, it's through MIH, because they're not making more land unless you rezone it.
Significant a portion of apartments are created via working with nonprofits. Explain why you work with a nonprofit for an affordable housing development.
Land, as an example, is essentially becomes subsidy or contributed basis as equity to fulfill the affordable housing plan. In East New York, the concept was to create a win-win where we're not buying land, we are joint venturing 50-50 heads up with our partner, which is a well-established, well-represented congregation that looked at their excess land and from a mission-based perspective wanted to create inclusive mixed income housing such that we weren't warehousing all one income level, but then to create an organic community, which is defined as Reverend Bernard as an urban village where, like a traditional New York City neighborhood, you can have education, shopping, restaurants, open space,
Workshop, visit, play.
everything, you name it, all in one spot. So to me it was, wow, this is a tremendous opportunity. This is like the culmination of a dozen RFPs in one, where we can, from a clean slate, without any displacement, create a community within a larger community.
Now, in this development, they're all for rent.
The objective is to include a component. So as an example, we designed thus far within one of our private streets that's publicly accessible to create masonette units, which would be for affordable home ownership.
And we're doing something similar, but on a smaller scale with a Lutheran church, which has a big parcel of land and a place of worship that they want to upgrade or redo. So in exchange for putting the land as equity, we're giving them a brand new church, essentially. And on top of that, because they're looking for what's best for their community, we're providing 130, 140 affordable rentals for people in their community. So in that sense, it's a win-win, where they're not looking for a bottom line, you know, they're looking to provide for the community.
Something I think that's really important that you both have touched on is that the most exciting part when you work in affordable housing about partnering with a cultural institution is that it's really mission aligned, that you can really achieve both of our goals. We are all passionate about developing affordable housing, and it's exactly in line with the missions of these organizations. So when you find an organization that's looking to do the same thing you are, a partnership like that makes a lot of sense.
Because if you had to buy that land, the land we're talking about, from our perspective and the projects we're looking at, we can't really afford to pay more than $70 a buildable square foot and still do an affordable project.
We're also finding that nonprofits, they don't just need to be land rich and contributing land to deals. We're finding nonprofits as great experienced development partners that have been developing affordable housing themselves for years. There's nonprofits out there such as Canva in Brooklyn that probably have developed, you know, just as many affordable housing units in Brooklyn as any for-profit developer. They come with a balance sheet, they come with experience, they come with connections, and they come with a great mission at the same time.
It's
And
true,
they
we
want to
work.
stay involved. They don't want to be
Yep.
bought out and leave their communities. These are places they have long roots, and as you mentioned, those can be really beneficial in understanding what a community wants in the project and getting it out of the ground.
Because they're mission driven, that and the funding they're getting is to go towards this. So a lot of times, like we work with self-help and settlement, they're buying the land and bringing us in to help them develop it, and then they're going to manage it.
Explain for my audience the difference between regular affordable housing and senior housing.
So senior housing under today's regulations would fall into the category of what's called AIRS units, affordable independent residence for seniors. So 90% of that building needs to be restricted to that population.
62 and over.
62 and over, at not to exceed 80 AMI. So in New York City, if the AMI published is $106,000,
So
the
they
majority
could-
of the units would be between 30 and 60 AMI. And so 90% of that floor area would be specifically allocated to a senior population.
And there's funding within your budget for social services to make sure that you're connecting seniors with the services they need to age in place and to, thrive in the.
Now, are the
building.
services done through a nonprofit like you were talking about self-help?
In our case, yes, that's why we partner with them, because they specialize in managing those, because we don't have the capability. So they're specialized in actually underwriting it too, because they've worked for the city in the past and they're reputable and they know what they're doing.
What about for sale? That's in all the shows that I've been doing. Many years ago, we used to speak about for sale, especially when your dad built on 116th Street, and there was more for sale based on a certain price, and there were anchor programs and other programs. Today, can people get an affordable for sale unit? Because ownership is still a very important part of what people want in their lives.
Michael, in reaction to that, we're undertaking land use actions on a few developments and are exploring working with city planning and HPD to try and create affordable home ownership without leveraging public subsidy capital by enabling the market rate units through the land use action to cross-subsidize the creation of affordable home ownership. Really, the only way that could happen is such that the affordable homeowner doesn't have the real estate tax burden over the long run, such that they can borrow a manageable amount of debt that is covered by their 35% income limitation, and can put down a deposit which is manageable but meaningful, such that they would be vested in equity in the community that they thrive and live in.
Grant Avenue was a co-op up in the Bronx.
Right.
That was 160 units. We sold that out in a weekend.
Right.
We had I think 100 times the amount of applicants as we had units.
I think where you'll see opportunities arise to create affordable home ownership is any zoning action now that requires mandatory inclusionary housing. If you're in higher cost areas, and the market rate side is going to naturally gravitate to being for sale condominium units, developers are going to take a harder look at how to create affordable home ownership so that there's the synergy between the tenancy, both on the affordable side and the market rate side.
I mean, people have to be realistic under the current 421A program, the 70-30. 30% is affordable also for a period of 25, 30 years or even higher. When you hear affordable, it's not a self-contained unit. It's also in major developments. Most of the residential work that Slade's has been doing include a 30% affordable component, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, anything included in all of our rezonings, we're subject to MIH units. I think the city hasn't really achieved their home ownership program because they've been focused more on the lower AMIs in their affordable housing programs. And it's difficult to achieve both goals because when you have those low AMI units, the purchase price for the homeowner program, the prices just don't work out. They barely carry their operating expenses, so there would be no money to actually purchase if you had a 40 or 50% AMI unit. It really only works at the 70, 80, 90, or up to
So,
130 AMI.
From the sake of point of view of mayor, he's getting more affordable units for his dollar if he goes rental, which is why they push the rental programs, because they can say we're generating this amount of affordable units, whereas
That would-
And at the
corporate
incomes that
programs.
need it most, right?
Now,
The
with the-
low,
Right.
really low AMI individuals.
But
those
there's something to be
30s
said
and
about
40s.
the power of home ownership, especially in these areas that you want to see come up.
Everybody was mentioning that you're doing business in 4 of the 5 boroughs. You're the only one who's doing business in the 5th borough. The 5th borough happens to have a lot of available land.
Yeah.
They have new ferry systems going in there. They have amenities. They have shopping. Why aren't we seeing more affordable housing being built in Staten Island?
I just haven't found any sites in particular that worked within our business plan, but the waterfront areas have definitely upticked. There have been some successful developments. To credit the Irby product on the waterfront has done tremendously well. So just
It's density, right?
density
They're
in particular and the number of sites that are available, make that density available.
What
sites
about-
where you could build larger developments or
Yeah.
where
We
we
just
want to
built
put our
a
capital.
gorgeous senior project in Staten Island. It's on a beautiful campus. There's walking paths, there's services, as I mentioned, provided by the JCC of Staten Island. There's community spaces, so we think Staten Island's a great place to build, and we're definitely continuing to look at other
Because
opportunities
most
there.
of the developments, especially I noticed in Briarwood, is the Bronx.
We have 2 that we're working on right now in Bed-Stuy and Brooklyn. I mean, we go where we're going to be able to get the funding and the subsidies. I mean, the city kind of dictates where we think and where we have a good partner who's interested and has a leg up in terms of getting online to get these subsidies. We'll go anywhere. As
Now-
far as, you know,
We were talking about community facility spaces. Community facility space, the fresh grocery program. What other programs are included in many of these affordable communities?
Well, Brian mentioned AIRS. AIRS zone. It's basically a 20% zoning bonus for building senior affordable housing. So that's one that we're using in the Bronx.
I think it depends on where developments are too. A lot of the RFPs that we respond to are very clear about what they want in terms of community facility or retail space. If they're looking to have a grocery store, if they're looking for social services, a particular state RFP that
medical.
that recently
They
came
sometimes
out.
specify very specifically.
Yeah, they wanted healthy communities, services for foster care children, people who are leaving the criminal justice system. So the zoning might dictate, and what neighborhood they're trying to sort of activate might dictate having, retail on the ground floor, or they might be more interested in having community services provided. So that's something we think about on a project by project and community by community basis. Obviously, fresh is great because of the bonus.
For my viewers who have been happy over the years that they've been able to get an apartment, let's talk about how the system is. Housing Connect is very important. Explain Housing Connect. And if you don't have a computer, how you can also apply, and the income ranges and so on.
So as you mentioned, Housing Connect is great because it allows people to see all of the available units online.
Which basically means you go open up your
You open
computer.
up an account. I actually
and you-
opened one the other day, so I can look
Okay, and you
around.
go www.housingconnect or just Housing Connect, right?
And once you're there, you're able to see the different buildings that have availability, and you're eligible to apply based on your income band. So different projects have different incomes. As Brian mentioned, it's based on area median income. So as
The
a
area
And,
meaning
and family
the-
size.
yeah, and family size.
Which I think some of the people who are applying for these lotteries, that's a little bit complicated to them.
So area median income for a family of 4 in New York is $106,000 a year, and you can only pay up to 30% of that in rent. So the point is obviously to stabilize families by limiting the amount they spend in rent so they can afford the other things they need to live a full life. And the AMI bands range. So there's a big push now for our space, which is for the homeless population. I think it's about 10% on most term sheets in new developments. And then
Wasn't there the rule for the people who lived in the community board also?
There's a
They get-
50% preference
in some
preference.
for some
Yeah,
projects.
and that also, as you know, is a little bit
And also
controversial.
there was a preference for city police and fire department, I believe.
Civil
Teachers
service.
too, I believe.
And there's also a preference for disability units. So all of our projects make sure to have adaptability so that people who qualify and require.
So if you don't have a computer, how do you do this as an individual?
You can mail in the applications as well. So
Now, do you run meetings for people to understand how they can qualify? Because one of the problems that I remember one of the doormen in my building was saying, he earned a little bit too much, so he was thrown out of the lottery because you have to make within those bands, literally within those bands, based on the number of people in the household.
Right. I'd say a couple of things. With income averaging, which was passed, which allows units between 60 of the AMI to 80 being tax credit eligible now, a lot of folks who are being eliminated from eligibility now have, I think, better access moving forward. And then the second part of it is we've been part of discussions with different agencies on how to improve the marketing process. And that would include creating something online that helps steer residents to, through Q&A, what neighborhood are you interested in living in? How large of a unit do you need? What do you make? Sort of filtering through so that they're not throwing darts at the wall and they can focus their search. I think that's a key part of it. And thirdly is a lot of tenants get frustrated that there's one line for all the units. And if there's units at 30 and units at 130 AMI, everybody shouldn't be at the same line because that really slows things down. And someone that has limited means doesn't have the ability to just keep holding on with the existing apartment they have or don't have, right? So it's there's a push and pull to find a better system.
I would add 2 things to that. One is that one of the benefits of also working closely with nonprofit partners is they have large networks in the communities that we build with them in, and they often, for example, the Actors Fund, who's our partner on our Hell's Kitchen project, they hold sessions helping people in the community understand how to apply for housing. And this, this is part of their regular programming, not just about this project, which is years away. I think also one thing that it's important to get out and that is important from a marketing perspective is helping people understand that there are houses available at those higher income brackets, because I think people who are looking at units that are somewhat close to market
Right, because you
don't
can
realize
be
that
earning
they
up
could
to
be eligible.
130% of AMI.
On some
Depending,
units, yeah.
yeah.
Right, so on 130%, you could be earning $142,000.
Exactly, and making
Okay.
people.
And a lot of people don't realize that they could actually,
Qualify.
qualify, right.
So for 8 years, I lived in Long Island City, and we happened to win the Sites F&G RFP for Hunters Point South, Gotham, which is on the southernmost end of the waterfront. It'll be 1,100 plus apartments. And watching friend after friend after friend leaving the neighborhood because as rents escalated, the $40 rent market became 60. So what I found is a lot of folks that were moderate and middle income applied for the first Hunters Point sites, got into the lotto through the lotto through the community preference, and now reside in the first building that Relata built in. Beautiful middle income, moderate income community, and now they have a rent stabilized apartment.
And they're protected for life.
And they're protected. So these are hard working class families that wanted to call the neighborhood their home for the long term, and it created an option for them. Otherwise, they would have been pushed out.
Did they know about it because they were witnessing it go up? And they're in the immediate community.
The marketing
It's a little bit
process was
harder when
very
you're-
smart.
Right.
There were model homes for middle income units. There was advertising. Folks became aware. And so
Now, I remember a number of years ago, some of the senior housing that was built by Silverstein on the west side, they couldn't find people to move into the apartments. Has that happened in certain other neighborhoods?
I think in the Bronx, some of the higher income bands can sometimes be hard to fill because depending on the type of unit, and when you look at the guidelines for size and HPD and HGC units, they're smaller units in new buildings that are close to market. If you go down the street, you might get something double the price, double the size, that's a little bit older for the same price, or something smaller that has amenities that's market.
I remember that specifically on Silver Towers, they had like 130 or maybe 140 senior housing, and based on it was a certain, they were like 30% of AMI. So somebody was making a maximum of $30,000 here. They didn't have enough applicants for those apartments.
I don't think they're experiencing that now at all
Right.
with the senior units, especially at those lower AMI bands, like just
Lower ones, yeah.
at the higher AMI bands.
We
there's
finished
been
just finished
some,
Elton, which is in Melrose, which is an RFP. We were actually designated, I think it was 11 years ago now, and we just finished, and that's 200 units, and Phipps is handling the rent up for that, and they're having a slow go at the higher bands.
We list up 160 low income, so 30-60% AMI units in Staten
Right,
Island.
and
Very-
people have to understand when they're leasing an affordable apartment, they're not obligated to pay a broker's fee, right? They're free. Where do you see the opportunities in affordable housing? Is it on New York City Housing, NYCHA property?
Yeah, there's two things you haven't talked about that I think are really interesting and important right now. The first is definitely that NYCHA is putting out RFPs to do public-private partnerships to rehabilitate and preserve 62,000 units over the next 10 years. So that's, I think, a really big thing in the affordable housing space. It's really important for NYCHA. It's really important for, the
Right, we
hundreds of
have
thousands of New Yorkers.
all these New York City housing units which are in need of major renovations and repairs.
And it's a really exciting partnership. And I think also with the changes in the rent stabilization laws, there will be a different way people look at, obviously at a different price point than people were before, but there's definitely opportunity for seasoned developers to purchase.
Right, because you're
Existing
able,
buildings and rehab them.
under the 11A program, I think. you
Article 11. Yeah, there's it's not our forte. We're fashion as builders, as you know, Michael, but there is a niche where middle market existing buildings could be acquired for preservation rather than for what some other sponsors did, which is what excited the electeds, which was, turning units, which was taking units. out
Right,
of the
because
affordable
under the
housing.
preservation, they preserved, but your taxes are also saved for the next 25 or 30 years.
Right, it's purchasing long-term affordability.
In addition to the preservation work that Jessica mentioned with NYCHA, there's still just land that NYCHA has. NYCHA's sitting on a ton of land that that should be and I think will be open to developers. At my last,
With regard to NYCHA, we were talking before about the parking lots because they're, you know,
it's not just parking lots; it's land.
It's land.
At BFC, we
they would-
developed senior LGBT housing on vacant land on Myrtle Avenue in downtown Brooklyn. It was a NYCHA RFP. It was NYCHA land, and we built 100 and 150 units of 100% affordable senior LGBT housing. It just on land that had a few trees on it. There's a ton of opportunity like that all throughout NYCHA's portfolio.
I remember 10 years ago when the city's funding agencies didn't have any subsidy capital left or very little of it, right? We're at a peak where demand is now you can get online and wait for 2 years. I think the mandatory inclusionary program longer term will leverage and create more units through private capital.
Under the mandatory inclusionary housing, how much taller can you build?
So I think we would all agree that there are not a ton of sites that are as of right nowadays that are available to purchase. So any land use action, any rezoning, any major special permit is going to require mandatory inclusionary housing. So if we were to buy a manufacturing site in an unprotected area, not in an industrial zone, and create 300 units, we'd have 100 permanent affordable apartments under the 70-30 program. So without government capital, assuming you can purchase that land and rezone it accordingly, you could create, in an area where market rents support it, those affordable housing units through cross-subsidization. It depends on the market that you're in and what the consumer needs.
And if
So-
they allow you to expedite that process, because buying land and having the carry cost of buying that land and then going for a rezoning or an upzoning, some of these things can take,
It could
a
take
year,
years,
2 years,
right.
right?
Well,
and-
that's
and
why
it's-
NYCHA sites are so attractive, right? You don't have to have that. It could be rezoned, entitled, while it's still under
Right.
city control. And
Right,
then
they don't need the
rezoned.
money up, right.
There's
So
no
in
money
con-
up front.
In conclusion, for affordable apartments, my apple is bright. And there are good things because all of the people are working over here and developing more apartments. And people winning the lottery for an affordable apartment is better than winning the lottery on a scratch-off game, as one would say. I'd like to thank Brian, Jessica, Dan, and John, and I'll see you next week.